Welcome to our program, Asia in Focus, Just Transitions and the Business and Human Rights Agenda. My name is Sean Lees, and I work for the United Nations Development Program in Asia Pacific. In partnership with the European Union, Asia in Focus explores the intersection between business, human rights, and the environment. In today's show, we'll explore the social and environmental challenges Asia faces as it transitions to renewable energy. Now, as the world works overtime to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, Asian governments face increasing pressure to reduce their economy's reliance on fossil fuels. However, the shift into renewable energy poses significant human rights challenges. Wind, solar, and hydroelectric power require land use changes, which may displace indigenous peoples and local communities. Renewable energy will also require the mining of critical minerals, which may pollute the environment and undermine livelihoods and public health. And still, the transition out of fossil fuels provokes its own human rights concerns. Millions of people in Asia rely on the fossil fuel industry for employment and income. States are dependent on tax revenues from the oil and gas industry to fund healthcare and education services. Can a transition into renewable energy and out of fossil fuels be achieved while respecting human rights? And do we have the luxury of time in the face of climate change to address everybody's concerns? Please join us for an illuminating discussion with our experts. Welcome back to the show. Today I'll be joined by guests working on energy policy, youth advocacy, and the renewable energy industry in Asia. Later in the program, we'll feature a special report highlighting Indonesia's efforts to achieve a just transition as the country works towards net zero carbon emissions. But before we dive in, please remember to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on all our future Asian Focus programs. Our first guest is Dr. Yang Fuqiang, Senior Advisor to the Climate Change and Energy Transition Program at the Institute of Energy in China. And joining Dr. Yang is Michael Williamson, the Section Chief of the Energy Division at the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia Pacific. Thank you both for joining me.
Glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Dr. Yang, let's start with you. Some have said that the just transition concept is a Western concept. Is this term or concept widely understood in China?
Yeah, so now just the transition is now widely used, particularly put into the Chinese government policies. China is, before is often say, we like to have a fair to everybody. Now just this transition cover more meanings. For instance, it's not only work, job, but also different class, different regions. So we have to treat them very equally, and simultaneously we have to use the legal to protect them.
So at the policy levels, people are using the term just transitions. It's well understood.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this though, with regards to China as a whole, the Chinese people, do they support renewable energy transition?
Of course. Renewable in China is, people understand that is a future energy. And so in China, renewable resources is very rich. And you understand China renewable capacity is account 60% in the world. And in the future, by the 2030, China properly renewable capacity will triples. And China will use renewable and provide clean energy to cope with the climate change, but also replace the coal.
You're painting a very positive picture about the place of renewables in China, but you did mention too the coal industry, and coal industry in China is one of the world's biggest, employs some of the world's largest numbers of workers. And in fact, if we move into renewables quickly, those coal workers are going to need jobs. In a study that you're involved with, you said that you can experience a direct loss, or China might experience a direct loss of 1.3 million jobs within the next decade and 2.3 million jobs in the next 30 years. Are there any concrete plans to reskill, retrain, and reemploy people who might lose their jobs in the coal industry in China?
Yeah. The number is right because based on our model, we predict this number is huge in the future, the job losses. And first is that we have to train the workers because training to find a new job. If the workers is old, we give the higher compensation for their retirement.
I see.
And for the young people, that's much easy. They can go to school to start another skill. And for the other workers, maybe if you like, they go back to the farmer, and that's fine. They also can get some compensations.
You worked in West Virginia for a long time. I think you went to school in the region, if not in West Virginia itself. This is a coal production heartland in the United States. Are the workers there facing the same challenges as the workers in China?
I stay in West Virginia for decades, so I love that that state's beautiful, particularly in the autumn. And I think the people living standards is get worse and worse.
In West Virginia?
Yeah, West Virginia. You can think before they produce a lot of coal.
Yeah.
And Pittsburgh is a kind of a steel center in that time is for United States, even for the world. But now the coal production is decline. And so we need something to take care of it.
Thank you, Dr. Yang. Michael, let's turn to you now. We've heard from Dr. Yang about the need to help coal workers make this transition to renewables as we phase out of oil, gas, and coal. It's not going to just displace millions in China. It's going to displace millions in the entire region. What are some of the solutions that we're seeing across Asia?
Thanks, Sean. You're absolutely correct. This is a really big thing on the radar screen in front of us. As we move to solve the climate crisis, it involves moving away from these old energy sources, fossil fuels, including coal. And indeed, it is going to have major ripples across employment in many countries, particularly countries which are rich in coal, and a lot of people are engaged in that sector. Part of the answer is early action on the part of governments, of planning ahead for this transition and engaging in a dialogue with communities about the different options.
Are countries in Asia taking early action?
We see a range of different approaches. I think to many countries, it's unclear the speed at which this transition will unfold. I believe in some cases it might be more rapid than what we see. But we see some very good examples coming out. I think Dr. Yang alluded to some good examples of best practice in China about how this transition is being managed in terms of assisting workers to move away from coal industries into newer sectors. And indeed, we see some parts of the Asia-Pacific region, such as in Australia, which has had a very decisive move away from coal in recent years that has resulted in the shutdown of several coal-fired power stations. What they're now doing is looking at those sites as new renewable energy zones. And so many of the workers are moving into clean energy sectors, into solar power, into offshore wind, and into energy storage projects.
The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is calling for, under SDG 7, access to affordable and clean energy by 2030. Do we have the time necessary to make this transition into renewables while also addressing the labor rights considerations, the land rights considerations, the cultural rights considerations that might be implicated?
Oh, you're correct, Sean. There's a big need for acceleration, not just in SDG 7, but across all of the SDGs. In fact, SDG 7 is probably one of the SDGs where you can see a lot of positive progress. We are doing well on some elements of SDG 7, including ensuring access to electricity across the region, where we've got to more than 98% of the population. We'll probably reach 100% comfortably within the deadline of 2030. But in fact, as we expand renewable energy, it means a commensurate shrinkage in many of the legacy industries, including coal-fired power generation. So managing that transition from the old sectors into the new sectors is really important. But I would say that we can afford to be optimistic, because when we look at what type of jobs we create in clean energy, we actually create more jobs per unit of investment. And on balance, those jobs are actually better quality jobs. So in the long term, we see a positive outcome. It's a question of how we manage the short-term pain for that long-term gain.
You're optimistic, but there are some skeptics that work in renewable energy that say that people who are vested in a just transition discussion are dealing in or engaging in trade-off denialism. That we can have it all, that everyone's rights can be respected, and we can meet the ambitions of the Paris 21 agreement. What do you say to these skeptics?
I think if we look at technology transitions, we've had many of them in the past, and we've managed to accommodate and manage the unintended consequences that arise from many of those. And this is no different. The only difference, I suspect, is in the fact that it's more profound and more far-reaching than other technology transitions we've seen in the past. But as far as the move to clean energy is concerned, the economics are taking over. I think the train has already left the station. The world is very, very confidently moving towards a future with advanced energy efficiency, with much more renewable power. As we build new capacity, particularly in the electricity generation sector, more and more of that capacity is going to be renewable. So this train is already moving down the tracks. Mm-hmm. The question is, how do we manage these unintended consequences? And that's really important, not just from a justice point of view, but from a point of view of governments trying to ensure that this transition is as smooth as possible. It's in everybody's interest to look after disadvantaged individual workers, communities, families as part of this process.
Now, the upfront costs of all of this transition to renewable energies is quite high. Whether it's wind turbines or extending grids or adapting grids to indoor battery costs, etc. Is the insistence that we move to renewables at the pace that we need to going to lead to inequalities within countries and between countries in Asia?
Well, you're correct, Sean. I mean, everything that we are looking at with SDG 7 in terms of the targets means a big scale up in finance. If we look at the existing finance moving into clean energy, we need to triple that on an annual basis between now and 2030 if we're going to meet these targets, particularly on renewable energy and energy efficiency. But in terms of inequality, when we look at what SDG 7 is targeting, it actually talks about access to energy. And this is really important to counteract growing inequality. When people have access to clean cooking, when they have access to electricity, it helps them in their daily life. It helps them get their children educated. It helps them do small business opportunities, to use mobile phones and ICT technologies. So that is a direct opportunity to counteract inequality. If we zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture, and we look at where the renewable energy is, we certainly know where the oil and gas is. Mm-hmm. It tends to be in countries that are doing very well. Renewable energy tends to be evenly distributed, and many of the poorest and least advantaged countries in our region actually have a lot of high quality renewable energy resources. Mm-hmm. And if they can exploit those at scale and export them across borders, it offers a chance for economic growth, economic diversification, and reduce the inequality between countries.
Well, thank you, Michael. And thank you, Dr. Yang, for joining our program today.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Ranked third in the world for coal production and boasting the third highest reserves of natural gas in the Asia-Pacific region, Indonesia relies heavily on its domestic fossil fuel reserves to meet its energy needs. While renewable energy holds significant potential in Southeast Asia, solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal power production remains low in Indonesia. The nation has, however, committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2060. And to help meet its goals, $20 billion will be allocated to the Just Energy Transition Partnership over the next 3 to 5 years. Can energy policies also prioritize equity and inclusivity? Join us as we explore this question in our special report.
Indonesia, a nation abundant in natural resources, faces a pivotal moment in its energy transition journey. With coal production ranking among the highest globally and vast reserves of natural gas, the reliance on fossil fuels is deeply ingrained in its energy landscape. However, escalating concerns regarding climate change and an urgent global push to reduce emissions, Indonesian leaders are taking big steps. The government plans to retire a quarter of the country's coal power by 2030 and boost renewables to hit net zero emissions by 2060.
Shift to renewable energy means that not only are we fulfilling basic needs and rights of people to have access to electricity for various dimensions of their lives, but it also means new job opportunities, new livelihood options. All of these really add up to a contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals, not only on SDG 7 per se, but the rollover effect of SDG 7 of electricity, of energy as an enabler for other goals is also a hugely important benefit that we can refer to.
Such example is the Accelerating Clean Energy Access to Reduce Inequality project, or ACCESS project, generously supported by the Korea International Cooperation Agency. This initiative has been actively implemented in the country since 2020, operating at the grassroots level to ensure equitable access to energy sources for all. By facilitating the installation of solar PV plants in 22 remote off-grid villages, the project has generated nearly 1.2 megawatts of solar power, positively impacting the lives of over 20,000 individuals.
The project has also supported local entrepreneurship. It's promoted gender equality and helped to boost economic activities in these areas, particularly showing how renewable energy can really make a very positive impact on communities that are otherwise maybe sometimes excluded or more marginalized than others, and creating the right kind of economic and social opportunities.
Apart from working at the grassroots level, the United Nations Development Programme also operates across various tiers of engagement. UNDP has actively collaborated with diverse ministries to establish emission caps for coal power plants, draft a roadmap for implementing a carbon tax, and institute a carbon registry system.
I would say that one challenge that remains is that the execution of commitments such as the JETP will be really critical factors in translating the commitment into actionable processes and results. So we really hope that with the collaborative efforts between government, private sector, communities, as well as support from development partners and trusted partners like UNDP, we'll be able to really enable the energy transition to happen in Indonesia in a way that is not only visionary, but also attainable and practical.
Dr. Marlistia Chitraningrum from the Institute for Essential Services Reform, an Indonesian organization dedicated to advancing sustainable energy policies and practices, believes that we need to talk to the communities about their concern on energy access, what they will use the energy for, and how the energy access will benefit them in the long term.
If we talk to different communities in East Nusa Tenggara, they may talk about how the energy access could benefit their farming activities. But if we talk to people in the coastal area, the energy access could benefit them for making their farming products more lasting longer so that they can sell it to the market and get more price for it. So I think it is very important to make sure this embedded in the approach of providing energy access, because what we have in mind or what we read on papers are often different from what the community needs.
I trust you found our special report engaging. A big thank you to our Indonesia team for sharing insights into the country's journey towards a just transition. Next on Asia in Focus, we have in the studio Matthew Kasdin, Director and Senior Counsel of Maxeon Solar Technologies, and Amira Bilqis from the ASEAN Center for Energy. Matthew, let's start with you. You've been working in the renewable energy industry for years now. What, in your experience, are the most salient human rights issues posed by the solar industry?
Thank you for the question, Sean. There's two issues. One is actually at the factories we have in Southeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, what you see, as I think you see in other parts of the world, is people migrating from the poorer parts to the richer parts. And so what that means is you have people from poorer countries in Southeast Asia moving to the richer countries in Southeast Asia as migrant workers. These people do what are called triple D jobs, which are jobs that are dirty, dangerous, and difficult, jobs that people in the richer country don't want to do. Often what happens is they're brought in, their passports are taken, they're put into essentially debt servitude. And these people don't speak the language in the country, and they're scared, they don't know their rights. So it's a recipe for abuse. So there's definitely a lot of documentation of forced labor in these factories in Southeast Asia of the migrant workers. The second area would be in terms of allegations of state-sponsored forced labor practices. And the issue you have there is that you can't investigate it. You can't go into the region. And even if you can go into the region, can you trust what people are saying if they're scared of the government? So in cases like that, what we see as consumers, we see governments saying, listen, we can't have anything coming from that region because the risk of forced labor is too high.
Now, one of the reactions from the West to this problem is to draft legislation that bans the imports of products that they believe might be made with forced labor. These forced labor import bans, what sort of impact are they having, positive or negatively, on human rights or indeed on the solar industry?
Sure. What's happening is essentially what you say is a bifurcation of supply chains. You have the United States in particular that's passed very strict legislation. And so companies are racing to comply with that legislation, but they do it only for the United States market. So what happens is the rest of the world winds up getting solar panels produced with potentially forced labor in it. And of course, the issue there is that that's no help to the worker that produced a solar panel, where it's sold, whether it's sold in the United States or the rest of the world. So we're very active in trying to level up, trying to bring up the standards in the rest of the world so that Europe, Southeast Asia, Australia don't become dumping grounds for products produced with forced labor that can't make it to the US.
We've been talking a lot about the production process, the upstream part of the business. Let's take a look at the downstream impacts just for a second. The development of solar farms involves, in some cases, large-scale land acquisition, in some cases. And there are allegations, again, in some cases, of displacement resulting from those new changes in land use, displacement of indigenous peoples, for example. How big a problem is this? And doesn't a company like yours have a responsibility on how their solar panels are being used?
So Sean, I do think that that one might be something that frankly is out of our control, us being somewhere in the middle. We manufacture solar panels and then we sell them. We don't necessarily control who the end users are. With that being said, we do sit on industry bodies and we do try to make the industry itself as responsible as it can be. So I sit on a council in Australia where we recently published a paper on how to deal with what they call the First Nations in Australia, how to do renewable projects in those areas. So I think it's a duty to be a good corporate citizen. Although there's not necessarily 100% control that we would have over the whole process.
And how big of a problem are these solar panel farms presenting with regards to people's land rights or cultural rights, indigenous people's rights?
I think it's only a problem if it's something that's done without consultation with them. For me, I think, and I've certainly seen where you have the decision makers in the room about where the solar panels, where the project's going to be, and the indigenous communities are not sitting at that table. If it's done in consultation with them, then I think it can really be a win-win because it could potentially be bringing jobs in terms of installing the solar panels, putting up the installation, and it can bring energy to those areas. So I think it can be a positive, but only if it's done in the right way.
Thank you, Matthew. Amira, let's turn to you now. In addition to working at the ASEAN Center for Energy, you're the co-founder for the Youth for Energy Southeast Asia. Tell us, when it comes to the transition to renewables, what do youth want?
There are different opinions, definitely. There are some that wanted to have 100% renewables. Some others wanted an energy diversification. Some others are quite pessimist on energy transitions happening. But above all, in general, we know that these energy transitions are actually posing a threat to our livelihoods, our future environment, as well as our jobs, basically. So we wanted to see that the discussions of energy transitions is inclusive, as mentioned before as well, that we want to sit at the table and also giving some insights as well, because as you know, projected wise, the youth populations are going to make up 50% of the populations in Southeast Asia by 2050.
You mentioned the importance of being included in a conversation. You have something to say, you have something to offer. Has there been meaningful inclusion of youth in policy decisions? And if so, what's that look like? What's that resulted in?
Actually, it's more to in the international level. So, for example, like blocks like the Y7, Y20, which is coming from the G20 and G7, they are also very much opened to that. There are BRICS, for example, in Southeast Asia. We have it last year from the Indonesian Chairmanship Initiative, where they have the Southeast Asia Youth Energy Forum, where all of the youth were sitting in the table, talking about what kind of recommendations that needs to be brought to the ministers. And then we have it and then present it. But it's on the level of initiative, 1 year off. So we wanted to see it as an integrated part, consistent, and also a sustainable space for us, the youth, to actually have a say as well on the energy policy making processes in the region.
You mentioned at the beginning that there is some disagreement between youth over the energy transition. Some are more pessimistic, some are bought in fully, and they think there's only one direction forward. I'm led to believe that the one thing that the youth do agree on is the need for decent, well-paid work. But do these youth who are in fossil fuel dependent regions or fossil fuel dependent states, do they have something to fear from the renewable energy transition?
They should, because there are a lot of decommissioning plans that are going on.
Decommissioning plans.
Yes, for all of the fossil fuel industries. And we see that all of this, well, not so much of a big of fractions right now, probably because the progress is slow, but we are going to see that it will gain momentum. And when it happens, we are not really ready on the reskilling part, retraining part, to make ourselves adjust with the new trends of employment, for example, like requirements to renewable jobs. Sometimes there are a lot of skills that we aren't actually being prepared of by the education system that exists right now. So definitely in support to reskilling, retraining, what actually makes us more relevant later on when the energy transitions would actually, coming faster than ever.
Now, gender inequality persists in many sectors, especially so in the energy sector. Have governments in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, have they done enough to develop just transition policies that are gender responsive?
Thanks for the questions. Actually, I would say it's not enough. There should be more efforts that needs to be taken care of for ASEAN to actually, embracing, mainstreaming gender in the energy sectors. Because as you can see right now, in the ministerial level, they are actually branded it as a just and inclusive energy transitions without actually mentioning a specific mention of gender or even the youth or even the indigenous people. That is why the explicit mention is actually important. But ASEAN Center for Energy also tried to take initiative by having and developing the ASEAN RE Gender Roadmap, which is the first of its kind with the support of Empower Project in the UN, from the UN. And that's actually supporting not only guiding the way on how we can actually weave women's role in the RE sectors, but also provide a pathway for international organizations, for partners, dialogue partners of ASEAN to actually supporting the ideas of women empowerment in the region, in the energy sector.
Well, thank you, Amira. And thank you, Matthew, for being on our show today.
Our pleasure.
My pleasure.
And that has been our show, Just Transitions and the Business Human Rights Agenda. Many thanks to our guests for their participation today. Stay tuned for our next webcast where we'll delve into the topic of ESG investing and the Business and Human Rights Agenda. Until next time, thank you for watching and goodbye.